We've all learned a lot about viruses lately, whether we wanted to or not. San Antonio City Councilman Manny Pelaez says there are other things just as contagious as the coronavirus, and it's up to you to decide what you're going to infect those around you with. He's got a prescription we can all share. Welcome to BexarCast. I'm Randy Langford, and this is BexarCast, a weekly interview with business, political, education, and nonprofit leaders. We're examining the relationships between all four and how each one benefits from the success of the other three. Manny Pelaez represents San Antonio's District 8 on the City Council, but his roots are all over town. He was the very first Toyota employee in San Antonio long before the company began manufacturing trucks on the South Side. He's the chair of San Antonio's Innovation and Technology Committee and the co-chair of the city's Intergovernmental Relations Committee. A graduate of Trinity University, he served on numerous metropolitan transit agencies and has been the general counsel for the Bexar County Battered Women and Children's Shelter for more than 10 years. Councilman Pelaez, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you making the time.
Thank you, Randy.
I'm especially glad to have you here because of your involvement in a couple of different San Antonio organizations. There's the Innovation and Technology and the Economic and Workforce Development Committees for the city of San Antonio. And workforce development related to technology is a big part of what we're doing at BexarFest. And I'd like you to talk about that for a second and just talk about how important is it to have a talented, well-trained workforce in San Antonio. I mean, that's got to be an of economic value.
Sure. So I think most people really just sort of focus on what's happening in their own cities, but and it comes as a surprise for folks to know that cities are engaged in a bloody knuckle fight with each other all over the world. Every major city is competing, and we know who our competitors are, to bring home as many good paying jobs as possible for our residents in our cities. And right now, the good paying jobs of today and tomorrow are those that have an emphasis on technology, biotech, research, information. And so we have here in San Antonio some very, very competitive businesses who aren't dumb either. And they go from city to city to city shopping for workforce. And they'll say, okay, we're going to set up a new factory, or we're going to set up a new call center. We're going to set up a new, research facility. And they ask the cities, they ask the council members like me, how many of the following people with these kinds of credentials live in your city that need a job today? And I'll be honest with you, there's other cities out there that answer that question in a way that's more attractive than the way San Antonio has answered that question. So we have really just, put our feet to the gas pedal and tried to create as many professionals as possible out there ready to be able to take on these jobs. And the reason we do it is because if we don't, a city that doesn't compete is a city that shrinks, and a city that shrinks is a city that dies.
Right. Absolutely, 100%. BexarFest started out, when we created BexarFest, it was a way for students to learn about media production. And we decided we can kill two birds with that stone. You can learn about media production and you can learn about a nonprofit organization. So that's how the pairing came to be. What I've had teachers tell me is students are learning, yes, media production, yes, nonprofit operations, but they're also learning skills that can apply to any career, not just media production or community service. You're going to have to be able to communicate. You're going to have to be able to deal with conflict resolution. You're going to have to be able to collaborate. Whether you're a filmmaker or an attorney or a city councilman or somebody that builds trucks at Toyota, how important are those skills going to be as you sell San Antonio, that we can go to corporations and businesses and say, look at how well-rounded our students are coming out of high school? That's got to be a value.
Well, the proof is in the pudding, right? We look at our economic environment every single day of every single week of every single month of the year, and really say to ourselves, where are our indicators showing that we're competitive, and where can we improve? And the one thing that is ubiquitously true across the board for every city on the planet is that there is no longer a job out there where you can get away with not knowing how to maximize the potential of this device, right? Or
Absolutely.
how to maximize the potential of this device that you and I are using right now to talk to each other
Right.
with. You cannot work in finance without having proficiency in the technology and the tools necessary to do those jobs. You cannot work in healthcare. You cannot work in entertainment even these days. You cannot film. You cannot work in transportation, engineering. Name the job. You really can't not do it. I mean, in fact, a lot of people said, well, I could be a blue collar worker and I can, operate, a tractor or a backhoe or whatever. Really? Where do you think the user's manual lives, right? You can't even access, the most simple of machines anymore without having some kind of access to the internet and knowing how to deftly manage that. And so anybody out there who thinks they're going to get by on just, not really taking this seriously and that they're going to be a success in the future, good luck.
Yeah, right. Right. This is also the first time a lot of these kids have engaged with adults on kind of a peer-to-peer level. In their experience, it's always been the parent and the child. You tell me what to do and I go do it. The student-teacher, that relationship. But when they're dealing with their nonprofit organization, it's client vendor.
Yeah.
So you're dealing with a client, and I've had coaches tell me that when they see their students go into that situation, go into that scenario, they suddenly become more mature and become more confident and more outgoing. And does that make them more employable?
Well, yeah, right. I mean, the ability to rise to the occasion and the ability to demonstrate that you are a serious person worthy of somebody else's trust. That is the key, right? We only have one form of currency in this planet, right? That allows us to do business with each other and create relationships and get things accomplished, right? And that currency is trust. And the only way that you can trust another person is you look at them and you say, okay, is he sending up all the flags that say I'm a trustworthy person? And, and if instead you're sending up flags that say I'm a goofball or I'm a dummy or whatever, right? They're going to take you at your word. And what you signal to them is exactly, what the way you're going to be treated. And so, I really like the program that you guys have created here, because it really does send home the message that being a serious person when it's time to be a serious person is the skill, right? Everything else is second, right? Now, that isn't to say that you can't have fun, that you can't be, interesting and colorful and all that. But at the end of the day, people are going to pay you to get the job done and to know the right answer to difficult questions, right? And you can be as interesting as you want to be, but unless you're able to master those two other skills, getting the job done and knowing the right answer to the question, you're really not going to be very employable at all.
Right. You'll be fun to hang out with, but you're not gonna get paid well.
Yeah.
One of the things about BearFest that we did very deliberately was we pair the students with their nonprofit organization in September, October, and then we have the premiere. That doesn't roll around till February. So these kids are engaged with the nonprofit organization for months. So they get a real deep understanding. They go beyond just taking the tour. I mean, you really get a significant peek behind the curtain. And they not only learn what the nonprofit organization does, but why and for who and how that serves the community. So we're giving the kids a broader perspective of their community and how they can be of service. And with that in the air, I'd kind of like to hear your backstory about how you came to be on the city council in 2017. You didn't just wake up one day and say, I think I'll run for city council. There had to be something that inspired you to live that life of service. Where did that come from?
Yeah, so many people don't know this, but my mom is the CEO of a very large nonprofit here in San Antonio called the Battered Women and Children's Shelter.
Oh, okay. No, I did not know that.
When we all moved to San Antonio in 1992, 1993, I came to San Antonio really with no relationships. I just came here to go to Trinity University, and I knew nobody. My mom didn't know anybody. My dad didn't know anybody neither did my two siblings. And, I very quickly realized that in San Antonio, where you went to high school, right? It was very important.
Right.
And, what neighborhood you lived in was very important. And I didn't have the right answers to any of those two questions. Where are you from? Where did you go to school, right?
Mhm.
And so I quickly began laying down roots because I knew that a person without relationships in San Antonio, you might as well have one arm tied behind your back, right? Just start
Absolutely.
from further behind the line. So I started volunteering with the Trinity University Volunteer Action Corps, picking up trash, volunteering at the Battered Women and Children's Shelter way back then before my mom started serving there. And I just fell in love with service. And so when I graduated from Trinity, I just fell in love with a girl and decided that I had to go to school where the girl was. And here I am in San Antonio as a lawyer. And I gravitated towards representing nonprofit organizations as their lawyer
Okay.
because, they're not any different than for-profit organizations.
Right.
Think about
That's
it.
a big misperception that
Yeah.
that they're different.
Yeah, they're the same. They buy services. They have payroll. They have a balance sheet. They finance debt. They own assets. They have employee problems like anybody else, right? They've got customers too. I mean, at the
Right.
end of the day, the difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit is, a tiny chapter in the IRS code called 501c3, right? And what they do with their profit. But at the end of the day, they're run the same way everybody else is. And so I learned a lot from representing them. And then, Toyota came around. And I don't know if you know this, Randy, but Toyota just called me out of the blue one day, some recruiter, and said, would you like to be Toyota's first employee in San Antonio? And I was like, sure,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
I wouldn't mind being a movie star either. Do you have that job available? And Toyota hired me. And I became the very first employee of Toyota in San Antonio in 2003.
I did not know that.
I became their lawyer here. I helped acquire the property that we have down there. I helped, put all the agreements together with the federal, state, and local governments, worked with a lot of nonprofit agencies, helped, with the whole process of hiring the first 2,000 people. It was really just a fascinating opportunity.
Wow.
And out of the blue, one day, Phil Hardberger, the mayor, calls me and says, would you like to serve on some board? What was it? I remember the drainage infrastructure bond board.
Now there's a
And I was like,
glamour
oh,
position.
yeah. And I said, sure, I'd love to. And he goes, great, you're the chairman. And I said, well, it's really exciting because there's two things in my life that I love more than my family, which is drainage and bonds. Right? Like, I have no idea what you're talking about. He says, you'll figure it out. And we worked on that. It was a $175 million project. And then Nelson Wolf calls me one day and says, would you like to serve on the board of VIA Transit Authority? I said, sure, that'd be interesting, right? Transit is important to people. And I learned about how important it is for a city to have a healthy transit system. Then I got a call and said, would you like to be the chairman of the Brooks Development Authority for the former Brooks Air Force Base? I said, chairman, wow, that sounds interesting. Let's do that. And that was an economic development, job creating, real estate development, what do you call it? Taking an Air Force base and turning it into a new town center where people live, work, play, and thrive. I loved it. Right. And I was like, I'm hooked on this. Right. And then I finally turned around and said, I think my hobby is public service. I really love this. Nobody's paying me to do it. And so city council seat became available, and I went and had a long conversation with my wife and a longer conversation with my most important constituent, which is my mother-in-law. And I got both of their permissions.
A wise man.
I ran for office, and I got to be honest with you, I was surprised to win. Really, the reason I did it more than anything else was just to show Max and Sophia, my two kids, what leadership looks like. Because we spend so much time talking about leadership. I told them, look, guys, we're going to try doing this. I probably won't win it because I don't feel like the winds are blowing in the right direction for your dad to win it. But if not me, who? And if not now, when? Right? That's a key leadership question we need to ask ourselves all the time. And we spend a lot of time at home talking about leadership, Randy. And I talked to my wife about it. I was like, I gotta do more than just talk to my kids about leadership. I gotta show them, right? And if we lose this thing, I got to show them what losing looks like too. Right.
Oh,
And then I won. And so now,
so now you're going to go lose
I
at
show,
something else so you can teach them that lesson.
now I'm losing my little bit of hair that fast,
But
but
I
my kids and my
appreciate you.
wife to back me up. And so far it's been a success.
I appreciate you saying that it was important for you to do this while your kids are watching, to let
Yeah.
them see what you're doing, because I'm a big believer that every adult is a role model, whether you want to be or not. You don't have a choice. The kids are watching, and your only choice is whether you're going to be a good one or not so good. And that's one of the elements of BearFest that I'm really proud of, is that we, as I mentioned, we put these kids in these nonprofit organizations for weeks at a time, months. And we immerse them in that culture of caring, where they're around adults who are have empathy and are compassionate and want to serve their community and want to make a difference, and that can't help but rub off. When kids see that, I like what they're doing there, I want to emulate that. I want some of that. So yeah, I'm a big believer in letting kids see what you're doing and provide them with some leadership. Good for you.
Randy, we're living through difficult times right now, but if
Sure.
anything, I think we are all, it's the debate is over, right? There are three things which are very contagious in this world. One is viruses, right?
Yeah.
The second one is hate. We know that hate and negativity are viral, right? And it's contagious. You want to teach someone to hate, they'll learn that very quickly. But the other thing that is just as viral and contagious is love and leadership, right? And loving your neighbor, loving your family, loving your city, and choosing to lead in that space. What ends up happening, you end up finding other people who say, I want to do that too.
Right.
And it builds on itself. And so, if it sounds like I'm a believer, I'm a believer.
Me
Leadership
too.
works.
Yeah. I'm so proud of San Antonio, the way that the schools and the nonprofits have embraced BearFest. This is the only city where this happens. There's nobody else in the world doing what we're doing here in San Antonio. And so far, we've had 60 schools make videos and photography and graphic design, original music. Kids are writing songs about nonprofit organizations. I'm amazed. But they've done that for 120 nonprofits in 4 years, and we're going into our 5th year. What does that say about our city, about our citizens?
I want to tell you that I'm surprised at those numbers, but I'm not. San Antonians just stopped surprising me a long time ago when it comes to their capacity to do amazing things. Instead of surprise, what I want to tell you is I'm amazed that we're the city that gets to lord over all other cities in this one respect and say, hey, look, this is the San Antonio way of doing things. We're better than you. And folks, if you're going to be proud of something, be proud of the fact that you're living in a city that does exactly the kinds of things that Randy just described, right? It's amazing to live in a community like this where we put service as part of our lifestyle, right? Sometimes people will do service and, they'll say, oh, well, on the side, I do a little bit of service and a little bit of leadership in my community. Here it is a defining part, right, of the DNA of a San Antonian. But again, it only happens if parents and students make that choice, right? Which is an amazing thing about San Antonio, is that we continue to give people that choice. Please serve, right? And people say, I will. And they do such a darn good job at it.
Absolutely. And that's my impression with the kids is I'm always, and again, this is the 5th year we've done this, I'm always blown away by the quality of what they create. And in addition to that, I'm impressed with, and this is going to sound corny, but they are fearless. They are absolutely fearless. The technology is nothing to them. The cameras and the microphones and the lights, they were born into that technology, so that's old hat to them. But they're not afraid of the story that they're being asked to tell. We're putting, well, like you say, the battered women in children's shelter. That's a tough topic. That's a hard lift. That's heavy. And so we're asking kids to tell that story. Tell the story of the Rape Crisis Center. Tell the story of the Battered Women's Center. Those are hard stories to tell, and these kids do not back away. They step right up, and it amazes me that they look at that and come to the realization that, wait a minute, there are homeless veterans in San Antonio. That the veterans don't have a place to live. There are kids who don't have enough to eat. not on my watch. And the kids take that and put it through their own lens and tell that story in a way no adult could or would have thought of. And I'm just
Well, the power,
proud
the
of them.
power of narrative is something that I think every leader masters, right? If you think about every leader who's done something really wonderful for their organization or for their community at large, think about that leader's ability to navigate through difficult conversations, right? And then to have these courageous conversations with folks about difficult topics that hurt, that make us face our prejudices and bias,
Mhm.
right? That challenge our assumptions, and that make us admit that maybe we were wrong all along and that there's a better way of solving something. And that maybe the people who came before us, right, who we respect very, very much, may not have known everything that, that they needed.
Yeah.
Having to come to those realizations is really hard, and it requires a lot of courage and a lot of gravitas, right? A lot of seriousness.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, you just said it, not on my watch. I was telling somebody the other day that not on my watch, not in my San Antonio should be a tagline, a hashtag,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Whenever we see something that we don't like, right, that we say that should not happen in my San Antonio,
Yeah.
hashtag not in my San Antonio, not on my watch, and fix it. Like, do something, right?
Right.
I mean, help us here. And so I'll give you an example of something, Randy, that worries the heck out of me. We talk a lot about homelessness and veterans, right? People living on the street, but San Antonio has very, very, very small bandwidth and capabilities to handle hospice services and palliative care for
Right.
people who are homeless, right? So there is the reality in San Antonio is that if you're a homeless veteran with a terminal disease, you're probably going to die under a bridge by yourself in pain. Well, not in my watch.
Right.
Not in my San Antonio, right? And we're working on city council on addressing that. And hopefully by the time I'm done serving on city council, we'll have some solutions in place to where if you don't have a home, at least you can die in a dignified way in the most powerful country and most, the richest country in the world. You shouldn't be dying on the streets. And that's why what these kids are doing at each one of their nonprofits is legacy building, right? I mean, it's wonderful.
And we want to light that fire.
Yeah.
If you can light that fire in a kid that's 16 or 17, that can burn for a lifetime.
Yeah.
And they get, and honest to goodness, kids, if you're listening, you can change the world. You have it within your hands to change the world.
Yeah, and for the better or for worse, right? I mean, the
Right.
world is easy to break, also, right? And as it plays out in the news every single day, you're seeing it. There's people out there who, come up with new, creative, and cruel ways to break the world.
Right.
But I'm just so happy to say that San Antonio pumps out, plenty of brain product out there
Yeah.
to stand, in the face of that wind and say, not in my San Antonio.
Not in my San Antonio.
Mm-hmm.
We make a big deal about the premiere event in the spring when the
Yeah.
kids get to see their videos on the big screen at the Tobin, and we treat them like superstars. There's a red carpet
They're
and
superstars.
photographers, yeah, and gift bags and all that kind of stuff. But I always make a point of telling them that this is the 10%. 90% of this is work. You're dragging cameras around, you're setting up lights, you're in an editing bay. Enjoy that process. And I've had actual teenagers, this is unbelievable. I've had actual teenagers tell me they appreciate being taken seriously. That this big premiere, these people, 1,000 people in the audience watching what I did, yeah, I'll do that again. And we tend to take kids, treat them like kids. Oh,
Yeah.
they're busy taking selfies, they're self-absorbed. But when you give them some direction and give them an objective, I'm just amazed at how they'll step up and challenge themselves and challenge their perceptions of what they're capable of.
Yeah, and folks, think of every large endeavor that's ever been, successfully carried out in the history of the world. We need everything from the general all the way on down to the ditch diggers, right?
Right.
And
Right.
everybody's got to do an excellent job. And if you don't do an excellent job, it doesn't matter if you're the general, and it doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter if you're a ditch digger. If everybody up here is not doing an excellent job either, you'll lose the war, right? Or you'll fail. And at the end of the day, what I tell people is that if you just show up and just do the best you can every day, that's it. That's all we want. Just show up and do the best you can, right? Everything else will sort of fall into place, right? So long as you surround yourself by other people who are also showing up and doing the best they can,
right? We're all doing the best we can.
Thankfully, the universe has been programmed in such a way by someone way smarter than I am, to where that formula for success, is not that difficult to grasp, but it's hard work.
Right? It is hard work.
Yeah.
Don't think it's going to be easy, but it's definitely going to be worthwhile.
Yeah, it definitely is. Now, the other thing too is don't forget, right? The leaders who lead enormous organizations, right, and make bajillions of dollars and all that, right? Most of them were at one moment frontline workers in those organizations, right? And if you want to be the police chief, chances are you were a rookie cop at one day. You want to be the general, you want to be a 5-star general, chances are you were, at boot camp one day. Sweating, right? And at the same time, if you want to be, a tech tycoon, chances are you had to sit through a coding class, or you had to go through a bear, the bear fest, right, to learn how to operate some of this equipment and and work in teams and take directions, because otherwise, if you don't get to do those base level jobs and work really hard at those, and sometimes, cut your finger, right? And stumble and fall and get scolded and make mistakes, well, then how do you expect to solve the bigger problems if you haven't yet solved the smaller ones? And so I think what you guys are doing, parents and students and Randy and staff, you guys are preparing not just the next generation of Bear Fest, participants, but you guys are, preparing the next generation of leaders in the United States.
I think so. I think we're giving these kids the opportunity to show what they're capable of and reinforcing that behavior, and that's where leaders come from.
Yeah. Now, I mean, I'll give you just one more simple example of why it's important to know what you're talking about, because that's it, right? Everybody seems to think, well, it's important to know somebody. If you don't know the right people, you won't get the right job. That's not true, right? At the end of the day, your airline pilot still needs to know how to take off and land, right? At the end of the day, your surgeon still needs to be able to cut you open, take out what's wrong, and then, sew you back up again, right? It doesn't matter who they know. It matters what they know, right? And that's why I think it's also so important for everybody to, work just as hard at school and, making sure that, they absorb all this information, right?
And speaking of working hard at school, I always make a point of thanking the teachers who bring their teams to BearFest, because that's not an easy thing to do. They got plenty on their plate. School teachers got plenty to do, and to take on this extra assignment to build your team and lead them into a nonprofit organization and help them go through all the process of creating their entry at BearFest, then bring them to the premiere. That's not an easy thing. And so I'm always very appreciative of the teachers who are willing to take on just one more thing that I don't really have to do. But again, that's the role model. That's the leadership that we want these kids to see. And I'm as proud of the teachers and the parents as I am of the kids.
Well, and it's important to note here that, whenever someone wins a Nobel Prize or a championship or an Oscar or something, have you noticed in their thank you speeches, they're always thanking their mentors and teachers?
Right.
There's a reason for that. I mean, nobody does this stuff on their own. And, behind every great man and woman stands a teacher pushing them and pushing them and pushing them.
And thank God. Thankfully there is. And thank you so much for being here. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your insight. Thanks for your enthusiasm. And, we're kind of working our way through what BearFest is going to look like in the post-pandemic world, but it's going to survive. It'll be there somehow or another. We haven't decided how it's going to work yet.
You're also training, future resilient leaders, right? And if this is a test, folks, and we're going to get through this. You know why? Because we have to.
We have to. Absolutely. Well, thanks again. I appreciate your input and your insights. Take care.